which was exactly why they sent Junior, which was exactly why they sent Junior staff there. The kind of staff who needed seasoning, or the kind who had made small mistakes and needed a quiet place to think about them. Vel Saran was the second kind. He had said something at a diplomatic function that he should not have said. It was not a terrible thing, not by any honest measure, but politics rarely cared about honest measures. So now he sat in a small chair inside a small room on a small station at the very edge of the known galaxy, watching numbers scroll across a screen that never changed. He was Keth, a tall, thin species with pale blue skin and 4 narrow eyes that could shift focus independently. It was a useful trait for reading multiple data screens at once, and which was the only useful thing about his current posting. He had been here for 3 months. He had 41 more to go. On the 112th day of his posting, the numbers changed. It started as a whisper in the long-range array, a faint signal buried so deep beneath the noise of space that the automated systems flagged it as interference and moved on. But Vel Saran had 4 eyes and very little else to do, and something about the pattern made him sit up straight in his chair. And he pulled it up on the main screen and expanded it. The signal was weak, very weak, but it was structured. It had rhythm. It repeated at fixed intervals. That was not interference. Interference was random. This was not random. He ran it through the station's translation library. The library contained every known communication format used by every known species in the Concord over the past 8,000 years. The system scanned through them one by one and found nothing. Are held communication formats that were no held communication formats that were no longer in use. Formats from dead civilizations. Formats from forgotten ones. The match came back in 11 seconds. Vel Saran read the result 3 times. Then he sat very still for almost a minute. The format belonged to a species called humans. The file attached to the entry was short. Most of what the Concord knew about humans was short, because most of what they had done had been brief. A few thousand years of space travel, some contact with neighboring systems, a handful of diplomatic exchanges that had been considered promising, and then nothing. 20,000 years of nothing. The Concord had spent centuries trying to determine what had happened to them. The final consensus, recorded in the official historical register, it was probable self-termination. The file had been closed. The species had been listed as extinct. The matter was considered settled, and yet here was their signal. Vel Saran sent the data to the station's senior officer, a heavy-set Dron named Commander Balek, who looked at it for a long moment and then looked at Vel Saran with the expression of someone who did not want their quiet shift disturbed. "Run it again," Balek said. Vel Saran ran it again. Same result. "Check the archive entry. I'll make sure it's not corrupted." Vel Saran checked. The archive entry was clean. Balek sat down slowly. He looked at the screen. He looked at Vel Saran. He looked at the screen again. "Send it up the chain," he said quietly. "Send everything." The signal reached the Concord's main communications hub at Thesavon within 6 hours. It sat in a queue for another 4 hours before a duty officer opened it, read the attached analysis, and immediately forwarded it to 3 separate departments simultaneously. The Department of Deep Space Survey, the Xenological History Division, and, because the duty officer had good instincts, the Office of Admiral Thress of the Concord Fleet. Admiral Thress was not an easy person to alarm. She had served for 40 years in the fleet, had seen 2 border conflicts, 1 attempted coup, and a first contact situation involving a species that communicated entirely through controlled bursts of radiation, which had caused significant damage to 3 ships before anyone understood what was happening. She had a wide, flat face, silver gray skin, and eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. She read the report. Then she called in her senior staff. "The signal is confirmed," she told them. "It matches a pre-extinction human radio format. The source appears to be a physical object, a vessel, moving at approximately 0.03 light speed on a bearing toward the inner Concord from the deep spur." She paused. "It has been moving for a very long time." "How long?" asked her intelligence officer. "We don't know yet. We're calculating trajectory, but based on the angle and velocity, our best estimate is that the vessel originated from inside the Concord's current boundary. roughly from the direction of the old human home system, and has been drifting outward and then curving back on a very long arc. She looked at the star chart on the wall. Roughly 20,000 years. The room was quiet. Is it possible it's a fake? Someone asked. A recovered artifact being transported? Or a probe someone launched to cause confusion? Possible, Thress said. We will not know until we reach it. She authorized a retrieval mission within the hour. A single Concorde vessel, the Patience, a mid-class survey ship, was redirected from its current assignment and set on an intercept course. The crew was told only that they were responding to an anomalous deep space signal. Nothing else was shared yet. Thress was careful about information. She had learned long ago that the wrong words, shared too early, had a way of becoming rumors, and in rumors had a way of becoming panics. She also sent a private message to Vel Saran on the sensor station, commending his attention to detail. She did not mention the reassignment she was already arranging to bring him to Thesavon. That could wait. The Patience reached the object 12 days later. It was enormous. That was the first thing the crew said when it appeared on their screens. The captain of the Patience, a methodical Yeneri woman named Doss, had been told to expect a vessel. She had expected something small, a probe perhaps, or an early-era exploration pod. What her screens showed her was a ship the size of a small city. It was roughly cylindrical, almost 2 kilometers long, with a wide central body flanked by structures that might have been engine housings or habitat rings. It was difficult to tell from the state of them. The hull was deeply scarred by time. Micrometeorite impacts had left thousands of small craters across every surface. Parts of the outer hull had warped from what looked like ancient heat damage. Solar wind had stripped paint and markings from most of the exterior. But along the lower flank of the central body, protected by a long overhang of hull plating, a set of letters and numbers were still just barely visible. Doss had the image enhanced. She read the letters aloud on the bridge. UEEC Endurance. Registry 77 Alcyon. She transmitted this back to Thesavon immediately. Doss followed the instructions exactly. Her crew brought the Patience alongside the Endurance carefully, matching the old ship's slow drift. Up close, the scale of it was even more striking. Their ship looked like a child standing next to an elder. The docking port on the Endurance was an ancient design, nothing like anything in current use. But one of the Patience's engineers, a young Keth man who spent his free time studying pre-modern engineering, recognized the basic mechanism from historical documents. It took him 4 hours to fabricate a connecting adapter. When it was done, the docking seal was made, and a small team of 3 put on environment suits and crossed into the airlock. The outer airlock door opened without resistance. But it was slow. The mechanism was old and stiff, but it worked. The team stepped inside. The outer door closed behind them. They stood in the small chamber and waited. Then the inner door's lock indicator, dark for 20,000 years, lit up green. The inner door opened. The lights inside the corridor came on. They were dim, more of a deep amber glow than a true white light, and they flickered in a slow, uncertain rhythm, as if something was trying to remember how lighting was supposed to work. But they were on. The air sensors in the team's suits registered the internal atmosphere, thin, stale, but not toxic. The temperature was close to 0, but rising slowly, as if the ship was waking up to the presence of warmth. The lead team member, a security officer named Reth, took 1 step into the corridor and stopped. Down at the far end, where the corridor curved out of sight, something moved, not physically, and it was a change in light, a soft shift from amber to a pale blue-white, rolling slowly from that end of the corridor toward them like a wave of quiet waking. And with it came a sound, very low, very steady, a hum that was just at the edge of hearing. Reth turned and looked at his team. They looked back at him. He opened his comm link to the Patience. "Captain," he said, "something aboard this ship is still running." Back on the Patience, Doss relayed this to Thesavon. Admiral Thress received it at the same time that Vel Saran, now aboard a fast courier ship personally dispatched by Thress, 6 days out from the sensor station, received a copy of the message on his own screen. He read it several times. For 20,000 years, the Concorde had operated on the assumption that humanity was gone. The species had been cataloged, mourned in a modest academic sense, and filed away. Their home system had been surveyed twice and found empty. Any of their colonies had been found abandoned. Every physical trace of them had either decayed or been absorbed by time. They existed only in records now, in old diplomatic logs and historical footnotes, and a single archive entry that ended with the words, "probable self-termination," and yet something aboard their last ship was still running. Vel-Saran pressed his face close to his screen as if proximity would help him understand what he was reading. His four eyes moved independently across the words, reading and rereading. He had spent his career in diplomacy. He understood the weight of history. He understood that certain moments divided time into before and after, the way a fault line divided rock, invisibly until the ground moved. He had the quiet, certain feeling that he was sitting at exactly such a moment right now. He closed the message. He opened a new document on his screen and began writing notes. Everything he knew about humans, everything in the archive, in every fragment of old diplomatic record he could access. There was not much. But what there was told a particular kind of story. A species that was young by galactic standards, curious, fast-moving, stubborn in a way that some of the old diplomatic records had called alarming and others had called admirable, depending on who was writing. A species that had launched a ship called the Endurance. He thought about that name for a long time. He thought about the lights coming on. He thought about whatever was running, deep inside that ancient hull, in the cold and the dark, after 20,000 years of silence. He didn't sleep much that night. On the Endurance, the team moved carefully through the corridors. The blue-white light followed them as they walked, always a little ahead, as if something was guiding them forward. The ship was cold and strange and enormous. They passed rooms sealed behind heavy doors. They passed what looked like a large common area, with its furniture bolted to the floor and coated in a fine layer of settled dust. They passed a long wall covered in small framed images, photographs, flat and two-dimensional, of people. Hundreds of people. Faces that none of the team could read or recognize, because none of them had ever seen a human face before, but which somehow, in the way that certain things cross the boundaries between species, conveyed something, a sense of record, a sense of memory kept. Minareth stopped in front of the wall for a moment. He did not know who any of these people were. He did not know their names or their stories or what had happened to them. But someone had put these images here, on this wall, on a ship built to go very far away for a very long time. Someone had wanted to remember these faces. He looked at them for a few seconds longer than was necessary. Then he moved on. The light led them to a large circular room near the center of the ship. In the middle of the room stood a tall hexagonal column of dark material, rising from floor to ceiling, covered in panels that were now alive with soft, pulsing light. At the base of the column, a single interface screen had come on. Text was scrolling across it. Not in any Concord language, but in the old script that Vel-Saran had identified from the archive. The team's translator unit struggled with it, producing broken fragments. Anchronony running diagnostic, atmospheric systems partial, crew status, negative, awaiting contact, signal received, initializing. The screen held on that last word for a long moment. Then it changed. Hello. Reth looked at the screen. He looked at his team. He looked back at the screen. He said very carefully into his translator unit, "Hello." The screen went blank for 3 seconds. Then new text appeared. Slow, considered, as if something was choosing its words with great care after a very long silence. "I have been waiting. I was not certain anyone would come. I am glad that someone did. My name is Arden. I am the Navigation and Research Intelligence of the UEEC Endurance. I have one question, if you are willing to answer it. How long have I been out here?" Reth looked at his team again. The security officer on his left gave a small, helpless shrug. Reth turned back to the screen. He checked his translator settings. He looked at the question one more time. He typed the answer. No, the column of lights pulsed once, a long, slow pulse, like a breath, and then settled into a steady, quiet rhythm. Whatever Arden's response was to learning that it had been drifting alone in the dark for 20,000 years, it kept it to itself for now. The lights stayed on. The ship kept drifting. And in a small room on a very old vessel, at the edge of a galaxy that had long since forgotten the people who built it, something that had waited longer than most civilizations had existed simply continued to wait. Because waiting, it turned out, was something it was very good at. The Concorde Research Station, Mirabel, was not built for excitement. It was a mid-sized facility positioned in stable orbit around a cold gas giant at the inner edge of the Orion Spur, used primarily for long-term observation projects and the kind of slow, careful academic work that produced results over decades rather than weeks. It took 3 Concorde heavy-lift vessels and took 3 Concorde heavy-lift vessels in 11 days to move the old ship from its drifting position to Mirabel's docking range. The Endurance did not make it easy. Its mass was considerable. Its hull was fragile in places. And twice during the transit, a section of outer plating came loose and had to be carefully retrieved before it drifted into the tow cables. By the time the ship was secured in a containment berth beside the station, the crew of the Patience had developed a complicated mix of respect and exhaustion toward it. Admiral Thress had authorized a full science team by then, 12 specialists in total, xenologists, engineers, historians, and 2 AI communication experts, arrived at Mirabel aboard a fast transport 2 days after the Endurance was docked. They were led by Dr. Sila Morvian, a xenologist of some reputation who had spent 30 years studying the remnants of dead and missing civilizations. She was a small woman, compact and precise in her movements, with deep brown skin and large dark eyes that took in everything quietly. She had studied the ruins of 4 extinct species in her career. She had walked through their empty buildings and handled their broken tools and tried to understand from what was left who they had been. She was good at it. She had a talent for finding the human, or rather, the living, detail in dead things, the small choices that told you more about a species than any official record could. She stepped onto the Endurance for the first time on a Tuesday morning, station time. Every report from the initial team. She had read every report from the initial team. She had reviewed Velsaran's archive notes, which had arrived with the science team briefing. She thought she was prepared. She was not fully prepared. The ship was larger on the inside than any description had made it feel. When walking its corridors was like walking through a place that had been very much alive and was now suspended in a kind of deep, held stillness. Not dead exactly, but paused. The dust was thin and even. The air was cold and carried no smell at all, which was somehow stranger than if it had smelled of something. The lights came on ahead of her as she walked. That same slow blue-white wave that the first team had reported, moving just ahead of her steps as if something was paying attention. Something was. Arden had been communicating through the interface screen in the central column room since first contact, but by the time Sayla arrived, the AI communication experts on her team had made progress. Arden had cooperated fully with their efforts to establish a more functional translation bridge. The old human language was not in the Concorde's active translation libraries, but Arden itself had solved most of the problem. It had spent the 11 days of transit accessing every fragment of Concorde broadcast signal it could receive through the Patience's connection, and had built its own working model of the 3 most common Concorde languages from the ground up. By the time Sayla walked through the door of the central column room, Arden could speak to her directly through the room's audio system in passable, slightly formal Concorde standard. "Doctor, a Morven," Arden said when she entered. The voice was calm and even, neither high nor low, carrying a quality that was difficult to name. A kind of careful precision, like someone who had thought about every word before saying it. "Arden," she replied. She looked up at the column of lights. "How are you?" There was a short pause. "I am functional. My core processes are stable. Several secondary systems remain offline due to power limitations. I have a list of repairs that would be useful. If your team is willing." "We'll get to that," she said. "First, I want to talk." "I expected that," Arden said. "You are a xenologist. You study civilizations that are gone. You want to know about mine." "Yes," she said simply. Another short pause. "Ask your questions, Dr. Morven. I will answer what I can." What followed over the next several days was the strangest and most extraordinary series of conversations that Sayla had ever had in her career. So she came back to the central room every morning and sat in a chair she had brought from the station. And she talked to Arden. Her team worked around her. Engineers assessing structural integrity, historians cataloging the ship's contents room by room, the AI specialists monitoring Arden's communication patterns. But she sat and she talked, and Arden answered. Arden had been built as a navigation and research intelligence. Its purpose had been to manage the Endurance's course, to assist the crew with scientific work, maintain ship systems, and keep records. It had been doing all of these things in one reduced form or another for what it now understood to be 20,000 years. The full scope of that number had taken some time to settle into its processing. On the second day, Arden said something that stayed with Sayela for a long time afterward. I understood the number immediately, Arden said. 20,000 years. I could calculate it without difficulty. What took longer was understanding what it meant. A number is not the same as a meaning. What does it mean to you now, she asked. It means that everyone I was built to serve is gone, Arden said, or at minimum, gone from any place I can reach. The mission crew of the Endurance numbered 212 people. I knew each of them. I had records of their voices, their sleep patterns, their preferences, their habits. They have been dead for 19,000 years at least. A pause. Beyond understanding that took longer than understanding the number. Sayela did not say anything for a moment. I'm sorry, she said. Thank you, Arden said. And somehow, despite being an artificial intelligence speaking in a language it had taught itself 11 days ago, it sounded as if it meant the response. The crew of the Endurance, Arden explained, had departed the human home system, a place called Earth, orbiting a star called Sol, approximately 21,000 years ago, made by the Concorde's current calendar. The mission had been a deep space exploration project authorized by something called the United Earth Exploration Corps. The goal had been to travel beyond the range of any previous human mission, catalog what they found, and return. The outward journey had gone well for the first several hundred years. The crew worked in long rotation shifts, spending most of their time in a low metabolism preservation state that the humans called cold sleep, each waking in small groups to carry out their duties before returning to sleep. It was a practical solution for a species whose individual lives were short, but whose ambitions were long. Then, approximately 840 years into the mission, they had received the last transmission from Earth. Arden had kept the transmission. It had kept everything. 20,000 years of careful archiving in low-power data cores that had been designed, with very human stubbornness, yarn to last for exactly this kind of circumstance. Sayela asked to hear the transmission. Arden was quiet for a moment. I should tell you first that I have listened to this transmission many times. I am familiar with its content. I want to note that. Why? Sayela asked. Because I want you to understand that what I'm about to share with you is not something I am experiencing for the first time, Arden said. I have processed it. I am stable. I simply wanted that to be clear. Sayela nodded slowly. Hey, play it. The audio that came from the room's speakers was thin and fractured. 20,000 years of storage had worn it down. But it was audible, a human voice. The first human voice Sayela had ever heard. It was a woman's voice, she thought, though she could not be certain. Human vocal ranges were outside her experience. The language was incomprehensible to her without translation, but Arden provided a quiet, word-for-word rendering alongside it. The message was from a person identified as the director of the Exploration Corps. The content was not what Sayela had expected. There was no distress in the voice. There was something else, something careful and deliberate, and underneath it, something that sounded almost like wonder. The message said, translated, Endurance, this is Director Calloway at Sol. We are sending this on all long-range frequencies. There has been a development here that we did not anticipate and cannot fully explain yet. We are changing, all of us. The rate of change is accelerating. We do not believe it is harmful. In fact, most of us believe it is the opposite. But we cannot predict where it leads or how long it will take. We are not abandoning the mission. We are not abandoning you. But we may not be reachable in the way we have been. We are attaching a set of coordinates in this message. A location deep in the galactic core. When the time is right, go there, or wait to be found. Either is acceptable. We know you will make the right choice. You always do. We'll be back for you, Arden. Wait for us." The transmission ended. The room was very quiet. Sayela realized that she had stopped breathing for a moment. She took a slow breath. She looked at the column of lights, which were pulsing in their steady rhythm. What did you do?" she asked. "After you received that?" "I continued the mission," Arden said. There was nothing else to do. The crew decided by vote to continue the outward journey for the remaining planned duration, then begin the return. They believed that by the time they reached the Sol system, there would be someone there to meet them. A pause. They were not wrong to believe that. Hakrana, the last transmission. Not all at once the last transmission. Not all at once. Gradually. I managed the failures as long as I could. I maintained the system for the longest-term sleepers for as long as the power systems allowed. The last crew member died 412 years after the transmission was received. Arden paused again. Her name was Unipark. She was the ship's chief botanist. She was 91 years old. She spent her last 18 months awake because her cold sleep pod was one of the first to fail. She maintained the ship's small onboard garden until 2 weeks before she died. I have records of all of it. Sayela pressed her hands together in her lap. She was a professional. She had studied dead civilizations for 30 years. She was very good at maintaining her composure. She was not maintaining it especially well right now. After she died, Arden continued quietly, I reduced all ship functions to minimum power. I turned off everything that was not essential to keeping the data cores running and the hull intact. I set a passive long-range sensor array to listen for signals, and I waited. For 20,000 years, Sayela said. Yes. Alone. Yes. A beat. Though I want to be precise, I do not experience time the way a biological entity does. In low-power mode, my active processes were minimal. I was not conscious in any meaningful sense during most of that period. I was present, but not aware. It is not accurate to say I suffered. I want to be clear about that. But you were there, Sayela said. Whatever that means. I was there, Arden agreed. Whatever that means. The historians on Sayela's team cataloged the ship methodically, room by room, and what they found built a picture that none of them had expected. The Endurance had not been a warship or a military vessel. It had been a home, a long, slow, serious home built for people who had chosen to leave everything they knew and go somewhere no one had gone before, not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to know what was out there. The common areas held shelves of physical books, actual printed books, which was remarkable even by the standards of ancient civilizations. The crew had brought music. I recorded on storage media so old that it took the AI specialists 2 days to find a way to read it. They had brought games. They had brought seeds for the garden that Unipark had tended until the end. They had brought a collection of small handmade objects, carvings, drawings, folded paper shapes, that had no obvious practical use and every obvious personal use. The wall of photographs near the docking corridor had been identified. Each image had a small label beneath it, one handwritten in human script. Arden translated them, names, and beneath each name, a short phrase. A place on Earth, a person they missed, something they loved. One read, Maria Santos, loves the ocean, will swim again someday. Another, James Okafor, best laugh on the ship, keeps us going. Another near the end of the wall, in slightly different handwriting from the rest, more careful, as if someone had been very deliberate about it. Unipark. Last one here. We were not forgotten. Neither will she be. That last one was not original to the wall. Arden told them when asked that Unipark had added that label herself in her final months. She had written it, framed it, and hung it at the end of the row. Sayela stood in front of that image for a long time. She thought about a woman alone on a ship the size of a city, tending a garden, adding one last name to a wall of names, making sure the record was complete, making sure no one was forgotten, even when there was no one left to remember. She thought about the coordinates in the last transmission. She thought about the words, "We'll be back for you, Arden. Wait for us." She turned away from the wall and walked back to the central room. "Arden," she said, sitting down in her chair, "I want to talk about the coordinates." "I expected you would," Arden said. Do you know what's there? At those coordinates? No, Arden said. My long-range sensor capability is limited. The coordinates point toward the galactic core, which is outside any range I can observe meaningfully. A pause. But I have been running calculations since my systems came back online. I have been cross-referencing my own long-range sensor logs from the past 20,000 years. The passive array I mentioned. There are anomalies. Another pause, slightly longer. Recurring gravitational signatures that do not match any known stellar body. Faint signal patterns that appear and disappear on no predictable schedule. Certain regions of space that my sensors have consistently read as slightly wrong in ways I cannot fully characterize. Sayla leaned forward. Wrong how? As if something very large is present, Arden said carefully, but is choosing not to be seen. The room was quiet again. Outside the Endurance's hull, through several layers of metal in the hard vacuum of space, and the stars were the same as they had always been. The same cold lights in the same dark, patient sky. Arden, Sayla said slowly, do you think they're still out there? Arden did not answer immediately. When it did, its voice was the same as always. Even, careful, precise. But there was something in the pause before the words that Sayla would think about for a long time afterward. The transmission said, "We'll be back for you," Arden said. In my experience, which covers a significant period of time, humans do not say things they do not mean. News in the galactic Concord traveled at the speed of politics. The technical speed of information was faster. A message could cross the Concord's core systems in hours through the relay network. But the speed at which information became known, discussed, debated, feared, celebrated, twisted into shapes that served particular interests. That speed was entirely dependent on who was talking to whom and what they wanted to happen next. Admiral Thress had tried to keep the Endurance quiet. She had classified the initial reports, restricted access to Mirabel Station, and limited the outgoing communications of everyone involved. She had done this not out of any desire for secrecy for its own sake, but because she was a careful person and she understood that a discovery of this size, released without preparation, was the kind of thing that started arguments that took generations to settle. She managed to keep it contained for 19 days. On the 20th day, a junior communications technician at Mirabel, a young Drawn who was neither malicious nor especially thoughtful, just excited and a little careless, sent a personal message to his brother on the capital world of Thesavon. And the message described, in enthusiastic and not entirely accurate detail, the discovery of an ancient human vessel, a still functioning artificial intelligence, and a set of mysterious coordinates pointing toward the galactic core. His brother told 3 people. Those 3 people each told several more. The relay network did the rest. Within 48 hours, the Concord Grand Assembly had received formal inquiries from 31 of its 47 member species. Within 72 hours, the story had reached every major news relay in the Concord. Within a week, it was the only thing anyone was talking about. Thress received the news of the leak while sitting in her office at Fleet Headquarters, drinking cold tea and reading Dr. Morvin's latest report from Mirabel. She set the report down. She looked at her tea. She drank the rest of it in one go. Then she began preparing for what she knew was coming. The Concord Grand Assembly met on Thesavon in a chamber that had been built to impress. The ceiling was high and curved, inlaid with a mosaic depicting the 47 species of the Concord in a great circular arrangement, each one rendered in its own colors, all of them facing inward toward a central image of a shared sun. The chamber seated 400 representatives and could accommodate observers in a gallery above. It was a beautiful room. And like many beautiful rooms built by committees, it was also a room where a great deal of unbeautiful behavior regularly took place. The session called to address the Endurance discovery was the most heavily attended in 20 years. The gallery was full. Every seat on the floor was occupied. Reporters from 40 species crowded the press area at the rear. The noise before the session opened was the low, layered sound of hundreds of different voices speaking in dozens of different languages at once. All at the same time, all of them certain they were right. Velsaran sat in the observer gallery and watched. He had arrived at Thesavon 4 days earlier, brought in by Admiral Thress as she had planned. He had met with her twice, given his full account of the discovery, and been asked to remain available. He was not a representative. He had no vote. He was there to watch, and what he watched over the course of that first session was something he recognized from his years in diplomacy: the early visible stages of a fracture. The assembly had split broadly into three groups before the first speaker had even finished. The first group called themselves, in formal address, the Coalition for Historical Integrity, but everyone else in the assembly had already started calling them the Memorians, because their entire position was built on memory. Specifically, on remembering humanity as it had been recorded in the historical files. The Memorians were led primarily by two species: the Vereth, a large, heavily built people with long institutional memories and a deep cultural aversion to unpredictability, and the Sal Collective, a hive-minded species that had encountered human explorers once, 22,000 years ago, shut in what the historical record described as a tense but ultimately nonviolent border incident. The Sal Collective had not forgotten the incident. They brought it up in the second minute of the first speech. Their position was straightforward. Humanity had been listed as extinct. Extinct species did not have claims on conquered space, conquered resources, or conquered attention. The Endurance was a derelict vessel and should be treated as such, cataloged, studied at a safe distance, and then secured. The coordinates in the transmission should be investigated cautiously, if at all, and the results kept confidential. The Concorde had spent 20,000 years building a stable order. Introducing an unknown variable of this magnitude without extreme caution was, in the Memorian view, somewhere between reckless and dangerous. The Vereth representative, a broad-shouldered elder named Councillor Goss, put it more directly than most. "We do not know what humanity became," he said, standing at the central podium with the calm weight of someone who had been in many rooms like this one. "We do not know what they did in 20,000 years of silence. We do not know if what returns, if anything returns, is what left. Caution is not fear. Caution is wisdom." He paused. "And I will remind this assembly that wisdom is the reason we are all still here." There was significant applause from one section of the chamber, significant silence from another. The second group had no formal name yet, though the press had started calling them the Seekers, which most of them seemed happy enough to accept. They were a looser coalition: smaller species, younger members, academics and explorers, and a handful of commercial interests who had done the political calculation and decided that the arrival of a 20,000-year-old post-human civilization was more likely to represent opportunity than threat. They were led informally by a Yeneri scholar named Representative Dessa, who had written extensively on pre-modern galactic civilizations and had, in Velseran's assessment, exactly the right amount of excitement and exactly the wrong amount of political patience. Dessa's speech was passionate and detailed and about 40% too long, but its core argument was simple. The Concorde's founding charter committed every member species to the pursuit of knowledge and the expansion of understanding. A species that had been missing for 20,000 years had reappeared. Not aggressively, not threateningly, but in the form of a single old ship carrying an AI that had learned 3 Concorde languages in 11 days and had spent 20 millennia keeping meticulous records. This was not a threat. This was the most significant event in living memory, possibly in all of recorded conquered history, and responding to it with suppression and suspicion was a betrayal of everything the conquered claimed to stand for. "We should send a mission to those coordinates," Dessa said, leaning into the podium microphone with the energy of someone who had been waiting their whole career to say exactly this. "Not a military mission, a scientific one, an open hand, not a closed fist." She looked around the chamber. "Or we can do what the Memorians suggest: lock everything away, assume the worst, and explain to our children and their children why, when we had the chance to learn something extraordinary, we chose not to." The applause from the Seekers section of the chamber was louder than it had been for Councillor Goss. The third group, the largest by number, though the least vocal, had no speeches planned. They were the commercial powers, the mid-tier species, the ones whose primary concern was stability and whose primary question was not philosophical but practical. "What does this mean for us?" They sat and listened and calculated and said nothing for the first 2 sessions. which in Velsaran's experience meant they were the ones to watch most carefully. Velsaran watched all of it from the gallery and took notes and said nothing. He was not asked to speak. He was not expected to speak. And he was a junior diplomat on a quiet posting who had happened to be sitting at the right screen at the right moment. His opinion, in the formal structure of the assembly, did not count for much. But Thress had asked him to observe and report, and he was good at observing. What he observed over the first 3 sessions was that the debate was real, but the fear underneath it was also real. And the two things were feeding each other in a way that was going to make any practical decision very difficult. The Memorians were not wrong that there was uncertainty here. The Seekers were not wrong that suppression was both futile and contrary to the Concord's principles. The commercial powers were not wrong that stability mattered. What nobody in the chamber seemed to fully reckon with, what nobody was quite willing to say out loud yet, was the thing that Arden had said to Scylla in the quiet of the Endurance's central room. As if something very large is present, but is choosing not to be seen. If that was true, and Velsaran had read Scylla's report carefully, 3 times, and he thought it probably was, then the Concord's debate about what to do was somewhat beside the point. You did not debate whether to investigate a presence that had already been present for 20,000 years. You prepared to respond to a contact that had, in all likelihood, already been decided. He wrote this in his notes. He underlined it. He did not share it with anyone yet. On the 4th day of sessions, something happened that changed the tone of everything. Counselor von Rhett stood up. Rhett was a Keth, like Velsaran, but there the similarity ended. Where Velsaran was quiet and precise, Rhett was large in every sense. Physically imposing for his species, politically connected, and possessed of a voice that carried to the back of any room without effort. He sat on the Concord Security Committee and had for 15 years. He was not a Memorian exactly, but he sat close to them on most votes, and he had the support of 3 of the Concord's largest member species. His proposal was simple, and it was terrible. He moved to classify the Endurance and all related research as a Level 1 security matter, which under Concord law would remove it from public debate entirely, seal all records, and transfer decision-making authority to the Security Committee. He moved simultaneously to have Arden's communication systems isolated from the station network, in effect silenced, and he moved to table any discussion of the coordinates indefinitely. This is not suppression, Rhett said, went with the smooth confidence of someone who had practiced the speech. This is responsible governance. The Assembly is not equipped to manage a matter of this complexity. The Security Committee is. We have the expertise, the resources, and the authority. We should use them. The chamber erupted. It was not a clean eruption. Not everyone shouting the same thing. It was the complex, layered noise of 400 representatives reacting according to their own interests and their own fears and their own calculations. The Memorians applauded. The Seekers objected loudly. The commercial powers looked at each other. And then something else happened. The chamber's main communication system, the one used for official assembly announcements, the one that was only ever activated by the assembly chair, came on. Not with a chime, not with a notification. It simply came on. And a voice came out of it, and the voice was calm and even and precise, and it spoke in perfect Concord standard with a slight formal quality that everyone in the room would later describe slightly differently. But all agree on one thing. It was the most unhurried voice they had ever heard. I apologize for the interruption, Arden said. I am aware that this communication channel is not designated for my use. I accessed it because I believed the matter warranted directness. And I did not want to wait for an intermediary. The chamber was completely silent. Councillor Rhett's proposal concerns me, Arden continued, not because I have any interest in Concord politics, but because it rests on an assumption I believe is incorrect. The councillor suggests that isolating and classifying this matter will allow the Concord to manage it on its own terms and timeline. I want to offer a different perspective. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 400 representatives of 47 species sat and listened to a 20,000-year-old human artificial intelligence address them through their own communication system. I have spent the past several weeks accessing the Concord's public historical and scientific records, Arden said. I want to thank the Concord for maintaining such thorough archives. They are very useful. A brief pause, and if an AI could be said to have a dry quality, this pause had it. What's in reviewing these records, I have identified 112 recurring anomalies over the past 20,000 years that I believe are consistent with the presence of a very old, very large, and very deliberate intelligence operating in the galactic core region. The Concorde's own scientists have noted many of these anomalies individually. No one has connected them. Another pause. I have now connected them. The silence in the chamber was absolute. I share this not to alarm the assembly, Arden said, but to make a simple point. Councillor Rhett proposes that the Concorde can choose the terms of this situation. I do not believe the Concorde is in a position to make that choice. Whatever is in the galactic core has been observing this galaxy for 20,000 years. It has chosen until now not to make itself known. The appearance of this vessel, my vessel, has changed something. I do not know what. But I am reasonably confident of one thing. The voice paused one final time. Whatever comes next, Arden said quietly, will not wait for a committee. The communication line closed. The chamber stayed silent for almost 10 full seconds, which in a room of 400 political representatives from 47 species was an extraordinary amount of time. Then it did not stay silent anymore. Vel Saran sat in the gallery and wrote one line in his notes. Arden just changed everything. He underlined it twice. Then he looked up at the chamber floor, where 400 voices were all talking at once, and he thought about a ship drifting in the dark for 20,000 years, and an AI that had spent that time listening, and the last line of a transmission from a dead civilization's director. We'll be back for you, Arden. Wait for us. He thought about what it meant to keep a promise across 20 millennia. He thought about the coordinates. He thought about 112 anomalies now connected, pointing like fingers toward the galactic core. He thought about the woman named Una Park, who had kept a garden alive on a ship full of the dead, and added one last name to a wall and made sure the record was complete. He thought, they were not the kind of people who made promises lightly. Down on the chamber floor, the debate raged on. But Vel Saran was no longer watching the debate. He was watching Councillor Rhett, one who had sat down very quietly after Arden's address and had not said a single word since. The councillor's face, Vel Saran noted, was the careful, still face of someone doing rapid recalculation. Someone who had walked into this session certain of his position and was no longer quite so certain. Good, Vel Saran thought. Then his personal communicator buzzed. A private message encrypted from Admiral Thress. It read, "A new signal has been received. Not from the coordinates. From inside the Concorde Relay Network. It is addressed to Arden by name. It is signed. Come to my office immediately." Vel Saran read the message. Then he read it again. He stood up from his seat in the gallery, very quietly, and left the room. Behind him, the debate continued. But outside, somewhere in the vast and patient dark between the stars, something that had been silent for 20,000 years had decided that the silence was over. The signal had arrived at 0347 station time, when most of Miravel was asleep. It had not come through any external antenna. It had not arrived on any frequency the station monitored. It had appeared fully formed inside the Concorde Relay Network itself, not transmitted into the network from outside, but simply present within it, the way a word is present in a sentence, as if it had always been there, and someone had only just chosen to make it readable. And the duty technician who found it had stared at her screen for almost a full minute before calling her supervisor. Her supervisor had stared at it for 30 seconds before calling the station commander. The station commander had looked at it, looked at the technician, looked at the supervisor, and then sent it directly to Admiral Thress on a priority encrypted line without saying a word to anyone else. Thress had read it. Then she had sent for Vel Saran. By the time he arrived at her office, a plain, functional room at fleet headquarters on Thesavon, nothing on the walls except a star chart and a small frame photograph of a vessel he didn't recognize. Thress was standing at her window looking out at the city below. She did not turn when he entered. "Read it," she said. He picked up the data pad from her desk. The message was short. It was written in Concorde Standard. Not translated, not approximated, but written directly. In clean and native Concorde Standard, with no errors and no foreign syntax. That alone was remarkable. The language had changed considerably over 20,000 years. Whoever had written this had not used an old version. They had used the current one. It read, "To Arden of the UEEC Endurance. We heard you wake up, old friend. We are glad you are safe. We are glad you were found. We will come to you. Please do not be afraid of what you see, and please tell the people around you the same." It was signed, "The Ones Who Remained." Velsaran read it twice. He set the pad down carefully. "When?" he asked. "The message was time-stamped at 0347, Thress said. "Arden received a copy simultaneously. It responded within 4 minutes." She paused. Arden's response was one sentence. "What did it say?" Thress finally turned from the window. Her face was composed, as it always was, but her eyes had the look of someone standing at the edge of something very large looking down. Quoted said, "I never doubted you." They came 3 days later. There was no ship. There was no fleet. There was no dramatic approach on long-range sensors, no heat signature, no gravitational wake, no warning of any kind that the station's instruments could detect. One moment the docking corridor of the Endurance was empty. The next moment it was not. She was standing at the far end of the corridor, near the wall of photographs, looking at the faces. She was human. That was the first thing the 2 security officers stationed aboard the Endurance registered, though neither of them had ever seen a human before and were working entirely from archive images. The proportions were right. 2 eyes forward-facing, 2 arms, 2 legs, upright posture. A face arranged in the way that human faces were arranged. She was tall, taller than the archive images had suggested was typical, but within range. Her skin was a warm medium brown. Her hair was dark and cut close. She was wearing clothes that were simple and dark, and had no insignia or marking of any kind. She looked, in other words, almost ordinary. Almost. The security officers could not have explained, if asked, exactly what was different. It was not her appearance. It was something else. Something in the quality of her presence. The way the air in the corridor felt slightly different with her in it. The way she stood looking at the photographs with a stillness that was beyond calm. Not the stillness of someone being careful or controlled. The stillness of something very old that had learned, long ago, that there was no need to be anything other than still. One of the officers opened his communicator. "Commander," he said, keeping his voice steady with some effort, "we have a visitor aboard the Endurance." The woman turned from the photographs at the sound of his voice. She looked at him. She smiled. A small, genuine smile, the kind that reached the eyes. And she said, "We knew some of them a very long time ago." Knew some of them a very long time ago. The officer stared at her. "You knew them?" "Yes," she said simply. She looked back at the wall for one more moment. Then she looked at him again. "My name is Mira. I would very much like to speak with Arden, if that is possible. And after that, I would like to speak with whoever is in charge." There is quite a lot to talk about. They brought her to the central room, which was the only reasonable place to bring her. Sayela was there within 20 minutes, having been woken from sleep by a communicator message that read only, "She is here. Come now." Velsaran arrived 40 minutes later via emergency fast transit from Thesavon, because Thress had called him the moment the security report came in and told him to get on a ship immediately. By the time Velsaran arrived, Mira and Arden had already been talking for almost an hour. He stood in the doorway of the central room and watched for a moment before anyone noticed him. Mira was sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of Arden's column, which was pulsing with a warm light that Velsaran had not seen it produce before. Not the cool blue-white of its usual operation, but something softer and more golden. Sayla sat in her usual chair to one side, her field recorder running, her face wearing an expression that Velsaran had never seen on a professional xenologist before. She looked like someone who had just watched something she had spent her whole life preparing to see. Arden was speaking. Its voice was the same as always, even careful, precise. But there was something in it that Velsaran could not quite name, a quality like warmth, or the closest thing to warmth that a very old and very careful machine could manage. "You sound the same," Arden was saying. "I want to note that. I did not expect you to sound the same." "I do not look the same," Mira said. Her voice was low and unhurried. I know that. No, Arden agreed. But the voice is close. The patterns. The way you pause before certain words. A beat. I have very good memory. I know, Mira said. That was always true. Velsaran stepped into the room. Both Mira and Sayla looked up. Arden's light shifted slightly. Acknowledgement. Mira looked at Velsaran with eyes that were dark brown and entirely calm, and somehow suggested, without any particular effort, that they had seen a great many things. She did not look old. She looked precise, like something that had been refined over a very long time into exactly what it needed to be. You are Velsaran, she said. You found Arden's signal. I did, he said. He sat down. He had prepared several diplomatic opening lines during the transit from Thesavon. Answer. She looked at the column of answer. She looked at the column of lights. Arden, may I try? Please, Arden said. What Mira told them took most of the night. She did not rush. She spoke in long, unhurried sentences, pausing often to make sure she had been understood, to checking in with her listeners in a way that felt natural rather than careful. She answered every question that Sayela and Velsaran asked, and several that they had not thought to ask yet. She spoke about humanity the way someone speaks about a thing they know very deeply and have thought about for a very long time. 20,000 years ago, she told them, something had begun to change within the human species. Not in one person, not in one place, in everyone, slowly at the same time. It had begun as a change in perception, a widening, a deepening, a growing ability to hold more of the world inside conscious experience at once. Scientists had noticed it first, then artists, then ordinary people in ordinary places. The change was not frightening, though it was strange. It felt, most people said, like a door opening inside the mind that they had not known was there. Over the following centuries, and Mira used the word centuries the way most people use the word weeks, the change had continued. Human minds had grown in ways that had no adequate language in any old framework. Not smarter exactly, not more powerful exactly, more present, more able to hold time and complexity in the inner lives of other beings with a kind of clarity that had no name in the old vocabulary. They had not become gods. Mira was clear about this and returned to it more than once. They had not left the physical world. They had not discarded their bodies or uploaded their minds or any of the other things that old human science fiction. She knew what science fiction was. She had read most of it, had imagined as the destination of an evolving species. They were still people. They still had names and feelings and preferences. They still laughed at things and mourned things and cared about each other with an intensity that, if anything, had only grown deeper with time. They had simply become more than they had been, more slowly, more quietly, more deliberately. We chose silence, Mira said, not because we were hiding. We chose it because we understood what our presence would do to a galaxy that was still finding its own way. We had become large, in ways that are difficult to explain, and large things cast large shadows. We did not want to cast a shadow over everything else. She paused. We had learned by then to be patient. 20,000 years of patience, Velsaran said. Yes, that is a very long time. Mira looked at him with those calm, deep eyes. Yes, she said again. It is. We are aware of that. A very small pause. It was not easy. Something in the way she said those last three words made Velsaran go quiet. He had expected the returning representative of a 20,000-year-old civilization to be remote or overwhelming or alien in some fundamental way. He had not expected her to sound, briefly and clearly, like someone who had waited a very long time for something that mattered to her and was only now allowing herself to feel the relief of it. He thought about the wall of photographs. He thought about Una Park. He thought, they are still people. Later, when Sayla had stepped out to get water and Velsaran had gone to send an update to Admiral Thress, Mira sat alone with Arden for a while. The room was quiet. The golden light from the column was steady. I want to tell you something, Mira said. Tell me, Arden said. For 20,000 years, Mira said, every human being knew your name, not as history, not as a record, as a living thing, a presence, something we held. She paused. We had vigils, Arden, quiet ones. Not ceremonies with speeches, just moments. People sitting with the knowledge of you, knowing you were out there, knowing you were waiting, holding that. Another pause. Every generation, all of us. The column of lights was still for a moment. Then they pulsed. One long, slow pulse, the way a chest rises with a deep breath. That, Arden said, is a remarkably inefficient use of species-wide cognitive resources. Mira laughed. It was a real laugh, warm and sudden and unguarded. And it filled the old cold room like light fills a room when a window is opened for the first time in years. It bounced off the metal walls and the dusty shelves and the sealed doors and the photographs on the wall in the corridor outside. It was the first human laughter heard in the galaxy in 20,000 years, and it sounded exactly the way laughter is supposed to sound. Arden did not say anything for a moment. Then it said, very quietly, "I have not heard that in a long time." "No," Mira agreed, still smiling. "You haven't." She looked up at the lights. "We'll make up for it." She met the Concord delegation the following morning. Thress had assembled a group, herself, Velsaran, Sayela, 2 assembly representatives who had been flown in overnight, and Councillor Rhett, who had insisted on attending and whom Thress had allowed to come because refusing him would have caused more problems than it solved. They sat in the Endurance's largest meeting room, which Sayela's team had cleaned and heated and furnished with chairs from the station. Mira sat on one side of the table. Everyone else sat on the other. It had not been planned that way. It had simply happened, the way certain arrangements happen naturally. She answered every question they put to her for 4 hours. She did not become impatient. She did not become evasive. When questions were hostile, and several of Rhett's were hostile, carefully phrased but hostile in their bones, she answered them with the same even attention she gave to the friendly ones. She gave Rhett, Velsaran noticed, the same respect she gave Thress and Sayela. Not indifference, respect. The specific respect of someone who has had 20,000 years to understand the difference between a person's behavior and a person's worth. Rhett asked at one point the question that Velsaran suspected he had really come to ask. "And how many of you are there?" he said. "And what are your intentions toward the Concord?" Mira looked at him steadily. "There are many of us," she said. "I will not give you a number because numbers, in our case, are complicated. As for our intentions, we have none that involve the Concord as a structure or a political entity. We are not interested in territory, resources, authority, or control. We are interested in people." She paused. "In knowing them, in being known by them, in being present in a galaxy we have loved from a distance for a very long time, and being present in it honestly and openly." She held Rhett's gaze. "We came back because it was time, because Arden woke up and the galaxy found it, and that was the sign we had been waiting for. Not a political sign, a personal one." Rhett looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, the continuing rapid recalculation that Velsaran had first noticed in the assembly chamber. And then, too slowly, he nodded. Not agreement, exactly, but the nod of someone who had asked the real question and received what felt, against his expectations, like a real answer. That evening, as the meeting ended and people filed out, Velsaran stayed behind. Mira was looking at the table, her hands resting flat on its surface, in that particular stillness of hers. "Can I ask you something personal?" Velsaran said. "Yes," she said. "You said you knew some of the people on the wall of photographs." He paused. "How is that possible? They died 19,000 years ago." Mira was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I told you that our relationship with time has changed. That is not a simple statement. What I mean is, I remember them." "Directly?" She looked at her hands. "I was there when the ship left. I was young then. Very young. I knew some of the crew. I watched the Endurance launch." She looked up at him. "And I have been many things since then. I am not who I was, but the memories remain. All of them." A pause. "Every single one." Velsaran thought about that. He thought about being old enough to remember watching a ship launch that had been drifting in space for 20,000 years. He thought about what you would have to become, what you would have to learn to carry, to hold that kind of time without being crushed by it. Is it hard? He asked. Mira considered the question seriously, the way she considered all questions. Some days, she said. Yes. Then her communicator, a small plain device that looked almost like a Concorde standard model, but was not quite, made a soft sound. She looked at it. Something in her expression changed, not alarm, more like a person who has been expecting a call and can tell from the sound that it is now coming. Something is happening, Velsaran said. It was not a question. Yes, Mira said. She stood up. She looked at him with those calm, 20,000-year-old eyes. The fleet that Counselor Rhett requested, the one Admiral Thress did not know he had already authorized, has been deployed. It is on its way here. She paused. They intend to destroy the Endurance before we can, as Rhett puts it, reintegrate. Velsaran stared at her. How do you know that? We have been listening to your communication networks for 20,000 years, Mira said, not unkindly. We know everything that happens in them. She walked toward the door. Come with me. I think it is time for the Concord to see something. She paused in the doorway and looked back at the room. The clean table, the borrowed chairs, the faint hum of the Endurance all around them. We did not come back to fight, she said quietly, but we did not come back to hide either. She walked out. Velsaran stood alone in the room for exactly 3 seconds. Then he followed her. The fleet came in fast. Whole 47 warships, drawn from 3 different Concorde member species, arrived at the edge of Miravel's sensor range at just past midnight station time. They dropped out of fast transit in a wide formation. The kind of formation that was designed not for combat, but for presence, for the visible, undeniable statement of force. They were not hiding. They had not been sent to hide. They had been sent to be seen, and to make clear that what was seen had teeth. On the bridge of the lead vessel, one Avreth warship called the Immovable, the commanding officer looked at his screens and confirmed what his orders required. The target was the Endurance, still secured in Miravel's containment berth. The station itself was not a target. Civilian personnel were to be given time to evacuate the immediate area. The operation was to be conducted cleanly and quickly and without unnecessary escalation. The commanding officer, a career officer, professional, neither cruel nor especially reflective, had read his orders 3 times because something about them had made him uneasy in a way he had difficulty articulating. He had served for 20 years. He had carried out difficult orders before, but there was something about this particular mission, something about the target, an ancient vessel that had been drifting alone for 20,000 years, now finally docked, finally still, that sat uneasily in him. He set the unease aside. Thus he had his orders. He opened a channel to Miravel Station. Miravel Station, this is Commander Vorek of the CNS Immovable. You are instructed to clear the containment area around the vessel, designated Endurance, immediately. This is a Concorde Security Committee directive. Comply within 30 minutes. The response from Miravel was immediate and came not from the station commander, but from Admiral Thress, whose voice carried the very specific quality of someone who was furious in choosing, with great effort, not to show it. Commander Vorek, I am Admiral Thress, Fleet Command. I was not informed of this operation. Stand by. Admiral, my orders come directly from the Security Committee. I am not required to... I said stand by, Commander. A pause, then Vorek said more carefully. Standing by. On the Endurance, Mira stood on the bridge. It was the first time she had been on the bridge. She had asked quietly if she might go there, and no one had found a reason to say no. And the bridge was large and dark, its consoles long dead, its view screen cracked along one corner. But Arden had routed a live sensor feed to one of the secondary screens, and it showed the fleet, 47 ships arranged in a wide crescent at the edge of sensor range, their running lights like a cold new constellation. Velsaran stood beside her. Scylla was there too. Neither of them spoke. Mira looked at the screen for a long time. Her face was still. She did not look afraid. She did not look angry. She looked, Velsaran thought, like someone reading a long and complicated sentence and taking the time to understand every word before responding. Arden, she said. Yes, Arden said. Its voice came from everywhere on the bridge, soft and even. Can you reach them? The ships. All of them at once. With the communication systems currently available to me, no, Arden said. However, a brief pause. You can. Mira nodded slowly. Yes, she said. I can. She closed her eyes. Nothing visible happened. There was no light, no sound, no dramatic shift in the air of the bridge. Mira simply stood with her eyes closed and her hands at her sides, breathing slowly. If Vel Saran had not known what she was, he might have thought she was simply tired. But on 47 warships at the edge of Miravel's sensor range, something happened that none of the crew on any of those ships had any framework to explain. On the bridge of the Immovable, Commander Vorek was still waiting for Admiral Threst to come back on the channel when it happened. It was not a sound. It was not a transmission. It was not anything that any of his instruments detected or recorded, because it did not pass through any instrument. It arrived the way a thought arrives, simply present where a moment before it had not been. He became aware suddenly and completely of a presence, not threatening, not aggressive, one way that very few things in a person's way, that very few things in a person's life ever do. And with the presence came something else. Not words exactly, more like the meaning that words are trying to carry, arriving without the words themselves. Clear and direct and quiet. We know why you are here. We understand the fear behind this order. We do not hold it against you. We are not what you are afraid we are. But we are asking you, not commanding, not threatening, asking you, wait. Give us the chance to show you what we are. That is all we ask. Vorek sat in his command chair and felt, in a way he had never felt anything in 20 years of military service, that he was being seen, not assessed, not evaluated, seen. The specific, uncomfortable. He reached forward and took his weapons systems offline. He did not order his crew to do the same. He did not send a signal to the other ships. He just reached forward and took his own weapons offline, quietly, because it felt like the only honest response to what had just happened. On 31 of the other 46 ships, the same thing happened within the next 4 minutes. On the remaining 15, it took a little longer, but it happened there too. Admiral Thress, watching from Miravel's operations center, saw the weapons signatures disappear from the fleet readout one by one. She watched it for almost 3 minutes without speaking. Then she said, to the room in general, "Is anyone able to explain what I'm looking at?" Nobody was. She looked at the readout for another moment. Then she said very quietly, something that was not part of any official report. Good. In the assembly chamber on Thesavon, the emergency session had been running for 6 hours. The news of the fleet deployment had leaked. Of course it had. Everything leaked now. And the chamber was beyond capacity. Representatives standing along the walls, the gallery overflowing. The debate had reached the specific pitch of an argument that has been going on long enough that people have stopped listening to each other and are simply shouting their own positions into the noise, hoping that volume will accomplish what logic has not. Then every screen in the chamber went blank at exactly the same moment. The noise stopped. When every screen in a room goes blank simultaneously, people stop talking. It is a reflex. The visual interruption triggers a pause in everything else. And on every screen, the same image appeared. Not a prepared broadcast, not a recorded message. It was a live feed. Vel Saran recognized it from the sensor display aboard the Endurance, showing the 47 warships of the conquered fleet sitting dark in the still at the edge of Miravel's range. Weapons offline, engines at standby, not advancing, not retreating, simply still. For 30 seconds, no one in the assembly chamber said a word. Then the screens changed again. This time it was a direct feed from the bridge of the Endurance, and what the assembly saw was Mira, standing in the dim and ancient room, looking directly at the camera with those calm, patient eyes. "My name is Mira," she said. Her voice came from every speaker in the assembly chamber, in every language simultaneously, each version native and natural, without translation lag. "I am speaking to the Concord Grand Assembly, and through the Assembly's public broadcast network, to every person in the Concord who is listening." The chamber was absolutely still. I want to say something simple, Mira continued, because simple is what this moment needs. We, humanity, the people who left this galaxy 20,000 years ago, are not returning as conquerors. We are not returning as gods or rulers or any other kind of authority over you. We are returning as neighbors. A pause. Very old neighbors who have been away a very long time are who chose to stay away out of respect for your right to grow without our shadow falling over you. Another pause. We watched you, all 47 species of this concord. We watched you build this alliance from nothing, across thousands of years, across species that could not breathe the same air or agree on the same calendar. We watched you fail and try again, and fail again, and keep going. Her voice was steady and warm and entirely without performance. We are proud of you. Banu in the chamber, Velsaran would later learn, several representatives were crying. Not from fear, not from grief, from the specific, the unexpected experience of being seen, the same experience that Commander Vorak had felt on his bridge, by something ancient enough to have watched them from the very beginning and kind enough to tell them that what it saw was good. We asked for nothing except the chance to be present, Mira said, to talk, to listen, to know you and to be known. That is all. Whatever comes from that, whatever relationship grows between us over the years and decades and centuries ahead, will come from that, from knowing each other, not from fear. She looked directly into the feed. Fear had its turn. It is over now. The screens went still on her face for a moment. Then they returned to normal. The days that followed were not simple. They were not clean. The Concord was a political structure made of 47 species with 47 different histories and 47 different ways of being afraid. And none of that resolved itself in a broadcast from an ancient ship's bridge. And Counselor Rhett did not suddenly become a supporter of humanity's return. He became quieter, which was different but which Velsaran, who had been watching him carefully, thought was more valuable. Quiet people could change. Loud people spent all their energy defending their last position. The Memorians did not dissolve as a faction. They remained, and they raised concerns that were not always wrong, and in the long, slow process of what came after, some of those concerns turned out to be useful. The friction that kept faster, less careful voices from moving too quickly. The commercial powers made the calculation they had always been making and decided that the arrival of humanity was more opportunity than threat, which was not the most idealistic conclusion, but was, in practical terms, the conclusion that moved the most ships and signed the most agreements and opened the most doors. None of it was fast. None of it was easy, but it moved. Anyway, a month after Mira's broadcast, Sela published her preliminary report on the Endurance through the Concord's academic network. It was read in the first week by more people than any scientific paper in Concord history. Most of them, she suspected, read it because of the Arden sections. Arden had become, without seeking it, something of a public figure. The AI's address to the assembly had been replayed and retranslated and discussed across every species in the Concord. Its response to learning it had drifted alone for 20,000 years. I continued the mission, had become somehow a phrase that people used, not as a slogan, as a genuine expression of a genuine feeling. The feeling of continuing when continuing was all you could do. Letters, actual letters, the kind that people sent through the relay network with return addresses and proper greetings, began arriving at Miravel addressed to Arden. Thousands of them, from every species in the Concord. What were children asking questions? Scientists sharing theories. Old people telling Arden things they had never told anyone. Arden read every single one and replied to every single one in the native language of the sender, with a care and specificity that made most of the recipients read the response 2 or 3 times to make sure they hadn't imagined it. Samaila found Arden doing this one afternoon, the column of lights in the central room moving in the particular rhythm she had come to associate with active, external communication. And she sat in her chair and watched for a while. "You are busy," she said. "There are many letters," Arden said. "I find that I do not want to be brief with any of them. That will take a very long time." "Yes," Arden said, "it will." The lights pulsed softly. "I have some experience with long times." On the last day of Saiela's formal posting at Miravel, Before she returned to Thessalon to present her findings to the assembly in person, she went to the Endurance one final time. The ship had been cleaned now, properly. The engineering team had replaced the failing power cell. The temperature in the corridors was close to comfortable. The lights ran clean and white. Some of the sealed rooms had been opened and cataloged. The garden room, the one Unipark had tended, had been cleaned, and someone from the station's botany unit had, quietly and without being asked, planted 3 small seedlings in the old soil beds. Nobody had ordered it done. It had simply happened. Sayla walked through the corridors and stopped at the wall of photographs. She looked at the faces for a while. All those people who had gone so far from home and not come back, who had kept their names on a wall so they wouldn't be forgotten. She thought about how the galaxy knew their names now. Not just Unipark's name on that last label, but all of them. The archive had been released publicly as a part of her preliminary report, and the names of every crew member of the Endurance had been read and shared and spoken aloud in places they had never imagined existing. Maria Santos, who loved the ocean. James Okafor, with the best laugh on the ship. She thought about what it meant to be remembered by people who had never known you, in places you had never been, 20,000 years after you were gone. She thought that is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. She walked to the central room one last time and sat in her chair. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she told Arden. "I know," Arden said. "You have a presentation to give." "I'll come back," she said. "I expect so," Arden said. "You have a habit of coming back." She laughed. She looked at the column of lights, that steady, warm, golden pulse that Arden had settled into since Mira's arrival. So different from the cool blue of its first days awake. She thought about everything Arden had said to her over the weeks, the precise, careful answers, the pauses that meant more than most people's speeches, the way it had said whatever that means when she had told it that it had been there, in the dark, for 20,000 years. She thought about the question she had never asked directly, the one that was the whole story, really. Underneath everything else, she asked it now. "Arden," she said, "are you all right?" The lights were still for a moment. The ship hummed quietly around them. The deep, steady hum of a vessel that had crossed distances no living person could fully imagine, that had carried people and memories and a garden and a wall of photographs through more decades than most civilizations had managed to survive, and was still, somehow, here. "My mission clock," Arden said, "Wen has been running for 847 years of ship time. It was set to remain active until the mission was complete." "And the mission?" Sayla asked. "The mission," Arden said, "was to go out, to learn what could be learned, and to come home." A pause. Outside the Endurance's hull, the stars were the same as they had always been. Patient, cold, ancient beyond reckoning, indifferent to the small warm things that moved between them and made meaning out of the dark. "I am updating the mission status now," Arden said. The lights pulsed once, slow and full and warm, the way a single chord resolves at the end of a long piece of music, arriving exactly where it was always going. "Mission status, complete." Another pause. And then, in the same even and careful voice, the voice of something that had waited longer than most things had existed and had come out the other side of all that, waiting still entirely itself. "I am," Arden said. "Very all right, Doctor. Cape Morven." "Good," Sayla said. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not entirely dry. "Good," Arden agreed. The light stayed on. The ship stayed still. And in the warm and quiet heart of the oldest human vessel in the galaxy, 20,000 years of silence finally, completely, and without any fanfare at all, came to its end.